Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right in today because I am incredibly excited to guide you through a truly fascinating approach to mastering foreign languages. We're looking at something called the Shekhter Method. Now, if you've ever felt completely paralyzed trying to speak a new language, well, this explainer is absolutely for you. The Shekhter Method is what's known as an emotional, functional approach, and it's specifically designed for the rapid development of spoken fluency. Its motto is beautifully simple: foreign language like a native. It was actually developed back in the 1970s and has been constantly evolving ever since, and it fundamentally flips traditional education right on its head to figure out how we actually learn to speak. Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the language learning trap.
So, before we can really understand how this method creates fluent speakers so rapidly, we have to address a painfully universal problem. Why is it that millions of people dedicate years of their lives to studying languages, yet very few can actually speak, read, understand spoken speech, or, practically apply what they've learned? It's a remarkably common frustration. You study for years, you pass all the written tests, but the second you step off a plane in a foreign country and need to ask for directions, you freeze. Researchers at the Department of New Teaching Methods asked themselves this exact question, and they realized that, evidently, people were just being taught the wrong things in the exact wrong way.
And here is exactly where things go off the rails. On one hand, traditional methods assume that learning a language just means memorizing long lists of vocabulary and strict grammar rules, right? The whole idea is that the more exercises you complete, the better you'll know the language. But take a look at the real-life results on the other hand. When the moment comes to actually use the language to express a real thought, traditional methods force you into this terrible mental trap. You're trying to recall a rule, retrieve a vocabulary word, conjugate a verb, and literally manually build a sentence in your head before you even open your mouth. And the result? You freeze up. By the time you've finally built the sentence, the conversation is already moved on without you.
Which brings us to part 2, speech before grammar. To understand why we fail so spectacularly in traditional classrooms, we really need a complete paradigm shift here. We have to move away from academic study and look at how human beings actually naturally succeed at communication. I absolutely love this quote from the author of the method, Igor Shekhter. He noted, "Every physically and mentally healthy person speaks their native language, and they did not need formal academic training to do so. Children speak fluently by age 6 or 7 within their stage of development. School simply teaches them literacy." It's a brilliant distinction. I mean, think about it. A 6-year-old doesn't know what a past participle or a dangling modifier is, right? Yet they can tell you a completely complex story about their day. School teaches us literary norms, reading and writing. It doesn't teach us the core human capability to speak.
Which leads us to this vital concept, speech generation. When people speak natively, they aren't thinking about grammar at all. They are focused entirely on the meaning they want to convey. Speech generation happens spontaneously, completely at a subconscious level. You just feel whether a sentence sounds right or wrong. You don't calculate it. Historically, millions of illiterate people have spoken their native languages fluently and correctly without knowing a single grammar rule or even knowing how to read. So language usage isn't about mechanics, it's about generating speech.
So, let's look at part 3, enter the etude.
The big question now is, how does the Shekhter Method practically apply this speech-first philosophy? How do we actually learn without relying on those sterile, traditional classroom lists? Well, the primary teaching technique used to achieve this is something called the etude. An etude is essentially a role-playing game, and it's focused on accomplishing practical, real-life goals in a very natural context. In this method, you'll find no word lists, no artificial exercises, and no rigid memorization. The goal isn't to teach you a language, but to develop your existing human ability to express yourself. Instead of sitting at a desk conjugating verbs, students actually get out of their seats and act as passengers, taxi drivers, shopkeepers, or tourists. You're interacting exactly as people do in the real world.
Let's paint a picture of what this looks like in practice. Step 1, buy a plane ticket. Step 2, take a taxi. Step 3, book a hotel. Step 4, order dinner. Notice that the focus here is entirely on the action. When your brain is hyper-focused on achieving a real-life objective, like, say, just getting your hotel key, the learning task itself becomes indirect. You are trying to memorize words, you're just trying to communicate a need. And because the context is natural, the vocabulary and grammatical structures are absorbed indirectly, organically, and honestly, vastly more effectively than staring at a textbook.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the environment itself acts as a teaching tool. The Shekhter Method insists on an enjoyable and deeply relaxed environment. We are talking about classes filled with music, songs, tea breaks, and really comfortable social interaction. Why? Because in a low-stress environment,
Language grows from within. You aren't reciting rehearsed foreign phrases just to pass a test without making a mistake. You are genuinely interacting with people. In fact, the method claims the only real requirement from a student is to show up in a good mood.
Let's move on to part 4, the grammar question.
I know exactly what some of you highly analytical learners are thinking right now. You might be wondering if this relaxed, tea-drinking, role-playing method just creates total chaos. It's a very fair question to ask. Does the Shekhter method ignore grammar completely? Because, well, we've spent so much time talking about avoiding rules, it's a pretty common misconception that this method abandons grammar entirely and just lets students speak incorrectly forever.
But the answer is a definitive no. In the second and third cycles of a Shekhter course, about 25% of class time is indeed dedicated to explicit grammar study, while 75% remains firmly focused on practical speech and etudes. The trick here isn't ignoring grammar, the trick is timing. Grammar is only introduced after speech is already established. Once you have practical, hands-on experience with the language, grammar rules can be explained using examples you are already totally familiar with, which makes absorbing them just so much easier than rote memorization.
So the crucial point is this. Grammar does not build the language. Grammar normalizes it. You can't organize something that isn't even there yet, right? You must first generate the speech, create the raw material of communication, and only then do you apply the rules to normalize and refine it. It's a complete inversion of the traditional classroom model we're all used to.
Let's move to and see how this builds into part 5, breaking the fear barrier.
When you combine natural speech generation, relaxed environments, practical etudes, and delayed grammar, what is the actual result for the student? Well, the ultimate goal is to completely eliminate the psychological barrier and the fear of speaking. Over the course of just a few short months, students gain the confidence to communicate freely. They express themselves naturally. Yes, for sure, they might make minor mistakes initially, but they are communicating. They understand others, and others understand them. The Shekhter method believes that once this core confidence is built and that initial fear is totally destroyed, refining and expanding the language just becomes a lifelong, entirely natural process.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If traditional methods have failed you, it's really not your fault. You were just trying to build the roof before you poured the foundation. If grammar doesn't build a language, if spontaneous, fearless speech is the true foundation, what language will you start building today? Just imagine how much faster you could learn if you stopped obsessing over the rules, embraced the role play, and just allowed yourself to speak. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it completely changes the way you look at language learning.